Okay, uh, good evening, everyone. First of all, apologies about the slightly sporadic nature of the show the last couple of weeks. It's just been a little interrupted, and unfortunately, next week again it's going to be a little interrupted. I will send Belineda further source sheets, and that's what I'm trying to get us to the Mishnah. So the plan will be, Mitzvah Hashem today we'll get to the Mishnah quite fast. I will send sources that some of the things I reference, you can then look at post-Shiur and understand what I'm bringing out from the sources. And then in Mitzvah Hashem next week, there'll be plenty to do in starting the next Mishnah in preparation for a Shiur after that. So timing hopefully works. In addition, I think Adam has kindly offered to give hopefully we'll give a chaburah, perhaps on a short chaburah on Sunday morning on the sugya we didn't look into on the Tosos of Ein Bain, where Tosos references various Gemaras and so on. So this is a little gap that we left because it was slightly off topic but still important. So in Mitzvah Hashem, that's on offer for whoever wants to take advantage of that. So we're at the top of Kuf Chaf Dalad Omid Beis, where the Gemara continues to before we get to the view of Rav, and there's really two sugyas from the top of the Omid through to the Mishnah. The first part of the Omid is still really a continuation of Kuf Chaf Dalad Omid Aleph, where the Gemara is looking at the relationship between Muktza and Yom Tov, and the Gemara takes as a point of assumption that the reason for Muktza is because of Hotzah. That's what we began discussing last time. And then the second sugya is analyzing Rav's view, Rav holding like Rava and gets back to the core Muktza. So all I want to say in terms of finishing off from last time is that the Gemara seems to say explicitly that the reason for Muktza is because of Tiltul. We have a Gemara in the beginning of Beitzah. Sorry, the reason for Muktza is because of Hotzah. Apologies. There's a melachot of Hotzah. One's not allowed to carry on Shabbos. And the Gemara seems to say that Muktza is a Gezerah Otu Hotzah. Why then would only some objects be Muktza and not other objects be Muktza? Good question. Indeed, there was, in the era of Nechemia, an idea that a Muktza type halacha applied to all kelim because the Nechemia wanted to minimize the use of anything on Shabbos to avoid drifting towards melachos. But that's not what we're left with. What we're left with is that dependence on whether something is muchon or not is whether it's included in this gezerah of tiltul. So the real reason for Muktza is the gezerah of tiltul, and the gezerah of Hotzah. I'm sorry. The real reason for Muktza is the gezerah of Hotzah, but what that depends on is on hachana. However, this isn't so clear cut. There is a Gemara in the beginning of Beitzah which seems to link Muktza to a deraisa concept. The Gemara is not saying that Muktza is mamish deraisa. It's not necessarily saying that, but there is a concept, at least min haTorah of hachana, vehichinu es asher that everything should be prepared before Shabbos. And the Gemara seems to piggyback Muktza on that, or seems to be talking about something very similar to Muktza on that. This is the famous Mishnah at the beginning of Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, and the idea that an egg that's born may or may not be Muktza, but the tzad that it should be Muktza is because it's not muchen from Erev Yom Tov. Erev Yom Tov, it wasn't in existence, perhaps, and therefore is potentially Muktza. So that's the complication here. In the Rishonim, this manifests in the source that we printed in the source sheet, which is a Rambam who gives all sorts of different reasons for Muktza, and the Ravid who says, "What do you mean? You have a Gemara on Shabbos that says that the reason for Muktza is Tiltul. Therefore, why do you need your other reasons?" And I think I hope I referenced this very briefly in the last year, but just to spell this out, no, I didn't say this because I discussed it with someone after Shiur. There's a sefer that I don't think we've ever looked at in this chaburah, and I didn't print the source, called the Makeves HaMishnah, and he says that the Rambam understands that the Gemara only ever meant to say that according to Beis Shammai, you could argue that the basis of Muktza is because of the great basis of Muktza is because of Hotzah. And that's because Beis Shammai doesn't hold of the concept of mitoich. But if you hold of mitoich, so then if the reason for Muktza is melachos Hotzah, you've cancelled the whole of Muktza on Yom Tov. So let me just spell out what that means. Tosfos, which we saw in previous shiurim and in previous source sheets, says that on Yom Tov, Muktza, for the sake of Ochel Nefesh, is allowed. Now, it's certainly easier to understand that if Muktza is linked to a melacha of Hitzah, then if Muktza is independent of melacha, then it's a new din of Hachana. So again, there's two ways of understanding Muktza. Either Muktza is because of Vehechinu. On Shabbos, don't use unprepared things, in which case it's nothing to do with the melacha. It's got nothing to do with the lamates melachos. There's lamates melachos on Shabbos. There's other halachas on Shabbos. Zlachos Yom Shabbos Akadshe, say Kiddush, Oneg Shabbos, and various other halachas. So amongst the other halachas on Shabbos is Muktza. It's got nothing to do with melacha. In that case, Yom Tov would be the same. Why should Eichel Nefesh have anything to do with Muktza? However, if Muktza is a melacha, a gezerah otter, a melacha that is linked to melachas, then we understand the view of Tosfos that Eichel Nefesh allows Muktza on Yom Tov. Now, the problem is that Eichel Nefesh doesn't just allow melacha on Yom Tov, even other needs are allowed on Yom Tov based on the svara of Mitoich. That's really what our sugya is about. That even carrying a Sefer Torah or a child, which isn't Eichel Nefesh, nonetheless is allowed because of Mitoich. There's a svara on Yom Tov that the het of Eichel Nefesh doesn't, according to Beis Hillel, doesn't just mean Eichel Nefesh, but it means Mitoich also. Therefore, the Makevas Mishnah suggests that when the Gemara is saying this point in Beis Shammai, it's saying in Beis Shammai, the simplest explanation of Muktza is a gezerah otu hotzah, because Muktza definitely looks like a carrying type halacha. It's don't move things around. And therefore, the Gemara jumps to the conclusion that that the is of Muktza is because of melachas hotzah. But the halacha that we paskin like Beis Hillel, who says that on Yom Tov we do say mitaych. Therefore, if Muktza is only because of Hotzah, you would never have Muktza on Yom Tov at all. So what's the whole concept of Muktza on Yom Tov? It must be that according to Beis Hillel, there's other reasons for Muktza, and that's what the Rambam explains. So this is the
only for things which are necessary, you actually require.
But the threshold of necessity is very low. Any needs whatsoever. It's not just Eichel Nefesh according to Beis. We have such a view Beis Shammai, but that's the whole point that the Makevas Mishnah is saying. Our Gemara briefly references what's the lengthy topic in Beitzah, a separate topic, not Muktza, but the Svar of Mitoich. On Yom Tov, Eichel Nefesh is allowed. We paskin Beis Hillel, that's not just Eichel Nefesh, but it's Mitoich, any need, not for no need, but for any need. That's why we don't think much on Yom Tov about the nature of the needs. If we were living in Beis Shammai's universe, we'd have to always ask ourselves, is this Eichel Nefesh? That's really what the Gemara is saying. So Beis Shammai, when the Gemara says that Muktza is because of Hotzah, all it means to say is the most obvious thing to jump to for the reason for Muktza is Hotzah. According to Beis Shammai, you can get away with it. But according to Beis Hillel, it's impossible to suggest that Muktza is because of Hotzah, and that's where the Rambam's coming from. That's pilpul or shikol speculation. The Rambam. So it's not a muchach piece. It's not absolutely ironclad, but it's a reasonable suggestion of how the Rambam read our Gemara. Sorry, show me. Okay. So that's one point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make was a Marsha and a Chasam Sofer. I think we did see the Marsha briefly before, but I just want to spell it out here. The Marsha and the Chasam Sofer, and the truth is a whole stream of Acharonim, who I didn't print here. I just printed two of the most prominent Acharonim who discuss this. All learn that there's what in modern day Yeshivish parlance is called Tzvei Dinim or Trei Dinim. That there's two rules. So often when we have a Chakira, is a halacha because of A or halacha because of B, sometimes it will emerge that both are true and both have aspects of truth to them. And the Mashal and the Chasam Sofer both say the same idea, which is way beyond the scope of what we're learning here, but it touches on so much of what we've spoken about, so therefore it deserves reference, which is that Muktza includes an Issa Tiltul, which is moving things around, and also an Issa Hishtamshus, use, and Achila. We'll put Hishtamshus and Achila together because that's what they assume. We'll bracket them together. We saw that in the previous Gemara. We saw that in the bottom of Chuf Chav Dalet Omid Aleph, where it says that you can't be someich something on a bakas. You can't rest something on this lump of wood. Why can't you rest something on the lump of wood? I'm not moving it. The answer is, but I'm using it. You can't use Muktza on Yom Tov and Shabbos either. So the Mashal and the Chasam Sofer both understand that there's two halachas which look similar and have much overlap, but are driven by different forces. There's the Issa of Tiltul Muktza, which is driven by the Issa, the Gezerah of Hotzah. The reason I can't move Muktza is because of the Gezerah of Hotzah. The reason I can't eat or use Muktza has nothing to do with Hotzah. The reason I can't eat or use Muktza is because of Vehechinu, because of the din of Hachana, which ties in very nicely with the Gemara in Beitzah, which is coming from is talking about a Beitzah eating this egg, and it's really coming from Echinu, which is set in the context of the Mon. So use of objects and consumption of objects, Ishtamshus and Hana and Achila, is one type of Muktza, and that depends on a din of hachana, and the second type of Muktza is tiltal, and that depends on the din of Hotzah. That's what the Marsha and Chasam Sofer and a whole stream of Achronim say. Now, there's not a massive nafkamina really, because Chazal built the two takonos to work in parallel. Nonetheless, that the rationale behind them is driven by two different forces, and there will be several nafkaminas that come out, several distinctions. And the Mashal says the first of these distinctions, which is that Tosfos, who says that there's a heta of mitoich on Yom Tov for Muktza, the Mashal understands that to mean there's a heta of mitoich on Yom Tov for tiltal Muktza, because tiltal Muktza is paralleled with, is built on a Hotzah and a Gezer of Hotzah, and therefore Oichel Nefesh is a legitimate heta for it on Yom Tov. But Hishtamshus and Achila and Hana for Muktza, which is built, Hana doesn't mean that this Hana like benefit, I mean hands-on Hana, tangible use of an object. I should refer to it as Hishtamshus and Achila. That's dependent on the Hishinu, that's got nothing to do with the Menacha, and therefore Oichel Nefesh wouldn't be a heta for that on Yom Tov. That's the argument of the Marsha and Chasam Sofer. If I have time, I don't want to run out of time and not continue through the sugya, but if I have time, at the end, I will share with you Rabbi Kiva, who seems to say a similar chiluk, and comes up with other nafkaminas between these reasons. So there's a wealth of potential nafkaminas, but for now, I'm not going to go into them in detail. I'll just stop here. Yes, Karen.
Before we started on sugya, my naive assumption had been that the whole, the Muktza was a gezerah, lest you do a melachot.
Yes.
And that's why it's generally a
yes.
Is there, I mean, we haven't come across that you at all. Is that this Muktza is one particular type of melachot, but it would feel a lot more logical to say that it's not the Isser, don't pick it up, lest you actually.
You could say that. And a lot of people have that intuition. Don't pick up a pen because you might come to write with it. But let's talk about Muktza machmas kufa, a stone or a lump of wood. There's a lot of Issurim you can do with all sorts of things. But it's a stone, it's a lump of wood. If I want to use it, why shouldn't I? And then we have things which are just not muchen. So we haven't really come to this sugya, but someone who has grogras and smukim, they have drying fruits which are mid-process of drying, and therefore they're not muchen in your mind. They're removed from your mind. Even that's mukta. Why should that be mukta? So there's legitimacy in your view, and this is really what emerges in the Rambam and the Ravid and others. But Muktza seems to behave in line with Hachana. Seems to be the point of Muktza, the very meaning of the word Muktza, by the way, Haktsar, is a Hachana type word. Haktsar means set aside, not put aside for storage. Actually, the etymology of the word Haktsar is like a storeroom, something you just put away and you put up in the loft and you sort of forget about. Every house back in the day used to have a Muktza built next to it where they stored stuff. So it sounds like it's yeah. But Nechemia agrees with you. But we no longer live in a Nechemia universe. Yes.
Oh my God, is that the reason why food is considered to be a more stringent type of Muktza, because it's the shimush and it doesn't align with Bet Hillel mitoch concept at all?
So again, so food normally is the very opposite of Muktza. It's exactly muchen for achila. Food, by definition, is made for any ishtamshus. No. Those are foods which are removed from any use. So therefore they're mukta. So the stringency of mukta, there's a number of layers to things. You have to ask yourself, what's the reason why this is removed from your use? Is it minimally removed from your use because it's a klisha melachot and issa, but it's still a keli? Or is it maximally removed from your use because it's completely out of use? It happens to me there's some food items which can be maximally removed because you're drying them or whatever. But regular food is the very opposite of muktzah, is muchen. Now you have to ask yourself another question. What functionality is removed from our use? So with klisha melachot issa, the functionality removed from our use is not to use it for issa. But if I can take this hammer and crack a coconut from it, with respect to that, it's not muktzah. All we're now saying is there's another distinction to be drawn with functionality, which is carrying versus using or eating. That's what we're now saying. If we have time at the end, we'll see Rabbi Kiva, who begins pushing us to think about whether Muktza can be subject to a person, to an individual. So can Muktza be subject sensitive? Is it possible something to be Muktza for me, but not Muktza for you? And how would that work? I'll just, without going through this in detail, let's say, for example, someone makes a neder that they're never going to benefit from an apple. Right, they take a turn against apples. So for them on Shabbos, maybe an apple can be Muktza, even though for other people it wouldn't, and the whole sort of stream of interesting nafkaminas come out. Would food be Muktza for people who are fasting in Yom Kippur, but not Muktza for cholim who aren't fasting? And what about children? Could it make a difference if someone has children at home, so the food wouldn't be Muktza? And if they don't have children at home, it would be Muktza. Could food be Asa for one sort of Muktza, not the other sort? So it wouldn't be Muktza for Tiltul because you can move it around to feed to kids, but it would be Muktza for eating because we're not allowed to eat it. So can you end up with subjective Muktzas, and these things really are barely spoken about in practical halacha because we struggle to cope with halacha as it is, and these are very complicated scenarios. But the postings we talk about this exactly how moderated is muktzah. But we'll put that discussion on hold, and if we have time, we'll go back to Shemia.
So again, if muktzah is because of hakana, maybe because of hakana, why? What's the justification to distinguish between klish malach and esek klish malach?
Because a klish malach le'issa, we have three categories of muktzah for our purposes. You have eitzim avonim and rubbish and things like that have no functionality at all, so they're not muchen for anything. A klish malach le'issa isn't muchen for its primary use, and therefore it's muktzah, but it's still a keli. Kelim are our servants; they're our slaves. All kelim are that's what it means to be a utensil. So all kelim are by default muchen for any use I can squeeze out of them. And therefore, even though it's muktzah for its primary purpose, which is issa, but if I find another use which is mutter, it was never muktzah for that. It was always muchen for that. By default, the hammer hanging in your garage, set aside for DIY projects, is muchen for any use you can find for it, not an issa use. And therefore, if I now decide I want to crack a coconut with it, I can. Rabbi Nechemia, that's really Rabbi Nechemia on Kufchaf, not Nechemia, but Reb Nechemia on Kufchaf Talmud Amud, he disagrees with this, and he said Kelim are only muchen for the tashmish hamiyuchud lahem, for their primary purpose. A hammer is miyuchud for hammering nuts into nails into walls, and therefore any other use it's not muchen for. But we don't paskin like that. We paskin a keli is my slave. It's muchen for everything.
To rob or rather than be nothing is either tzarek mekayim or possibly mechamel itself. So there's nothing to do with how you're using it. The question is what a hammer or a klish malach le'issa is no less muchen to be moved than a klish malach le'issa. So less muchen to be moved.
The long answer to the question is listen to recordings of before you joined. So we did deal with it. The quick chazara answer to the question is all of this is really what the sugyas are about. So, for example, tzorech makomai. Why is a keli muchen a tzorech makomai? Why should it be allowed to tzorech makomai? Is it that you're allowed to move it to tzorech makomai because any keli that can be used for something, part of its use is to be able to shovel it out of the way so it can clear off to make space for other use. And therefore, all kelim are muchen for a klish malach le'issa in the same way as it's muchen LeTsorech gufay, i.e., I can use the hammer to crack a coconut, is also muchen LeTsorech makomai, which is to clear off and get out of the way when I need it out of the way, so I can do something else there. That would be the svara of the LeTsorech makomai. The counter svara would be kelim are your slaves. So if I want to use the hammer for a particular purpose, it's muchen for that. But just to move it around for no purpose, why would I be allowed to move it around? Mechamel etzel similarly is mechamel etzel. The logic to say that mechamel etzel would be also for klish malach le'issa is because all movements of mechamel etzel is to protect this keli, so I can use it for a mutter use. A klish malach le'issa, even though it's muchen for all other uses, but it's omeid, that means it's dedicated for only an issa use, and therefore I shouldn't be able to move it mechamel etzel because that's effectively moving it for an issa use. That when I move the keli just to protect the keli, I'm moving it for its primary purpose, which is an issa use. And therefore, it's not muchen for that. So all of this is playing with how far, what to be considered things muchen with. You have on one end of the spectrum Rabbi Nechemia, who holds that kelim are only muchen for their primary purpose, and then you have on the other end of the spectrum an idea that any keli is muchen for any use, and therefore even tzorech mekufah and tzorech mekoma, and then you have middle positions.
I would think it would make more sense to the other way around. But then in klish malach le'issa, everyone agrees that it's mutter to be tzorech mekoma. Because it's the use of its space is exactly the same. It doesn't matter what it's used for. Whereas maybe the tzorech gufay might then I would think there's enough.
So I'm going to stop you there again because of early Shiurim. We saw Tosfos who sort of half raised this point because there's this. One way of phrasing this is almost the steer sasukyas, where if tzorech gufay is mutter, kal v'chomer tzorech mekoma is mutter, or the other way around. So exactly this idea of and the truth is, even intuitively, without going too far into the Lomdas, I think one can feel an intuition both ways around. You could argue that Tzorech Gufay, in that sense, why should there be a difference between the Kedim? Or you could, between different Kedim, it's always Mucham to move out of the way. Or you could say, no, look, the Tzorech Gufay is something Mucham for use, is Mucham to tidy up and clear out of the way. Something that's not Mucham for use is not Umid for that. And there's the Shonim around this. We'll revisit these sugars again and again, so we'll get to that. Yeah. Okay, so this is really for now what I wanted to say on the first half, on the up to the fourth line of the Gemara. I now want to spend a bit of time just trying to work through all the way the last sort of 10 lines of Gemara, all the way from the top of the Amud through to the Mishnah, and I just want to make a few ha'aros really on the Gemara. The first one, actually, very, very interesting ha'ara, which I only sort of noticed properly because of the Balamar. So I didn't print the source, but I will give it out later. The Gemara says, so first of all, there's something phenomenal. I just want to share an amazing thing. The Gemara says that Rav holds like Rava. Then it brings a story of Rav Kahana, who came to Rav's house, and Rav said, bring a net so that Kahana can sit on it. So the Gemara is medayik from that. Why did he say, bring a net so that Kahana can sit on it? Which implies you're allowed to move the net, which is a klisha melachot LeTsorech gufay. Even without that heta, you can move a klisha melachot LeTsorech makoma also. So why did he bother saying, so that Kahana can sit on it? All I want to spell out is the degree of precision that the Gemara expected from an Amora outside the Beis HaMedrash. So we're used to Gemaras being medayik in how an Amora taught something inside the Beis HaMedrash. Here you have a casual conversation, right? A Talmud comes to visit his Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to someone, bring over something so my Talmud can sit down. And the Gemara is medayik. It expected Rav to be in teaching Torah mode the whole time, and to be medayik in his words in a phenomenal level. And that's just an assumption. I've never seen anyone spell this out, but you see that in how the Gemara works. I had this Torah many years ago in a completely different context, because I find this mind-blowing. The Gemara will quiz when you have an Amora who taught the same halacha twice. It will ask, why do you need both? What's the chiddush of both? That means it expected a Rosh Yeshiva to only ever teach to his Talmidim a halacha once in the life, and to keep track of never repeating themselves. It's an amazing thing. And if an Amora taught the same halacha twice, particularly if they use two different words, two different languages, we'd expect there to be a chiddush in both their phraseology. Occasionally, the Gemara will go one step more, and it will make a tzrichasa. That means it will want to be medayik a need when the Amora taught the same halacha twice, once through a memory in the Beis HaMedrash, and once through a story that happened to them. So expected an Amora always to be functioning on teaching level, so that they wouldn't even through actions spell out why they're doing an action twice if they've already taught the halacha in the Beis HaMedrash, or the other way around, if they've already taught it through the actions, they shouldn't teach it in the Beis HaMedrash. I just share that with you because it's holding. If we think about the concept of Yeshiva-style, and there's longer philosophical discussions for Sunday morning, not for this setting, but if we think about what standards of precision the Gemara expected from an Amora like Rav, I just find that absolutely mind-blowing. We learn Gemara and take it casually, but this is a very good example where all Rav did was he said, "Bring over a net so that my Talmud Karnas can sit down." Like, what's him? But the Gemara is medayik from that. Why did he give the reason? That's how Rashi explains the Gemara. It must be that that he holds that LeTsorech gufay is mutar, and on that the Gemara answers no. It's because otherwise it'd be moving at Mechama L'Tel, and he didn't want to misunderstood. Yeah.
When originally the voice is up the rubber,
yeah,
it doesn't initially seem to align exactly like Rava says. It just seems to be the logic of putting Tzorech and Tzorech come up together. Is that what it's trying to
correct?
do?
Yes, and Rashi spelled it out. Yeah, Rashi says that so LeTsorech and Tzorech gufay. Yeah, which sort of brings actually to your point as to what degree are they synonymous or not. So your earlier point about what's the relationship between Tzorech and gufay. Okay, so that's just some a first point. Now the Gemara answers that either Rav, we've completely misunderstood what Rav meant, and what Rav meant was take away the net so that Rav Kana can sit down. And what he was saying was the din of LeTsorech Mekomai. That's one understanding of Rav. The other explanation is because there was Mechama L'Tzel. That was a situation of Mechama L'Tzel. Now there's a very significant machlokas rishonim, and this is quite a nice case study in how seriously to take the exact phraseology of the Gemara. The simplest translation of the Gemara is that there was a case of Mechama L'Tzel. The reason they were moving it was Mechama L'Tzel. Hassam there, Mechama L'Tzel. Hava. It was Mechama L'Tzel. What does that mean? So Rashi, ever helpfully, explains what the Gemara really means was, it was a case where it was also getting damaged, and therefore Rav didn't want to be misunderstood that he was saying move it Mechama L'Tzel, and therefore he said we're moving in a LeTsorech Gufay, because he didn't want to misteach a halacha that he's moving it Mechama L'Tzel. But that's not quite what the Gemara says. Because what the Gemara says is it was Mechama L'Tzel. It was a moving it for Chama L'Tzel. Rashi says it was a situation of Chama L'Tzel which could have been misunderstood, therefore, as the reason for the meaning. So there is a Balamor which enters into halachic literature as a Mogain Avram, who says, no, it really was being moved because of Chama L'Tzel. The reason why Rav wanted it to be moved was because of Mechama L'Tzel. And it is mutter to create a scenario in order to say something on Shabbos. So do I, if I don't really want to sit down, am I allowed to move a Muktza item, Mechama L'Tzel, in order to be able to sit on it in a new place, in order to save the Muktza item? This is known in halachic literature as harama, trickery. It's not shaka, it's not untrue. I am going to sit on this Muktza item, Kahana is going to sit on it, but the motive why I want him to sit isn't because I really care about him sitting, but because I want to save an object, Mechama L'Tzel. Is that mutter or not? And I just point out that in Rashi, you don't have a raya, because Rashi says that's not what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying he didn't want to be misunderstood that he was moving Mechama L'Tzel, therefore he spelled it out. In the Balamor says the opposite. The Balamor says he was moving it Mechama L'Tzel, that's what the Gemara says, and he was being Mechadish that you can move something Mechama L'Tzel in order to, if you are going to use it, as long as it's genuine. So that's an important remark here. This ties a little bit into a Mishnah Berurah that we'll revisit later. There's not necessarily the same thing about how broad is the het of LeTsorech Gufay. Is the het of LeTsorech Gufay only when you don't have a non-Muktza alternative, or even not? So am I allowed to use my hammer again to crack the coconut when I could have used another implement? We saw that on the earlier Gemara. How did we come across that earlier? On the Bakas, maybe. I need to remember now why we saw this Mishnah Berurah earlier about is there a heta of using a LeTsorech Gufay when you have a non. Oh no, sorry. We saw at the top of Chavruta Damad Aleph where it spoke about these makolos and the case of Yodei al Kosef Chaveru of Yad Chaver al Kasefer v'Toilo Mashit. Where the Gemara was talking at the top of Chavruta Damad Aleph about skinning the hides of animals. And there's a slightly more inconvenient way of doing it, which is rather than using poles, you just stretch out your hands and the animal's suspended from that. And the Gemara seems to say that the het of the LeTsorech Gufay wouldn't allow you to use a Muktza item for that. What do you mean? You're genuinely using the Muktza item to skin an animal in a more convenient way, but you have an eitzah to avoid having to use the Muktza item. How broad an allowance is that? What I would suggest, Rabbi Zobin, because I can see that I've gone rusty on this, and I suspect that others also have, is maybe the week I'm away should be used for Chazorah, actually. Just to go back from the beginning of the period. I have to tell you, Muktza is very, very complicated. We've discovered that, and it's very easy to lose sight of the wood from the trees, and especially when we're moving slowly and doing it Ian, you can get so caught in the details that you lose the flow of everything. So I would suggest actually also just doing, from the beginning of the period. It's really worth doing Bekias Chazorah on everything, and just briefly re-dipping back into the Svaras in order not to lose sight of the wood from the trees. But either way, for now, all I'm going to say is that when the Gemara says Hossam Mechama L'Tzel Hava, doesn't mean it was his intention to move it Mechama L'Tzel, or he could have been misunderstood that was his intention. Machlok is rushing the Malamar with an Afkamina Halacha L'Maisa, whether you can be Ma'arim, do Harama to save things. Yes, Shemi.
Valamar might explain why he felt the need to get a net chair.
Or he was very poor.
He didn't
He didn't have other chairs. Yes, yeah. It's amazing. I mean, Pesach is coming up now, and this time of year as a Rav, I start doing chazorah on Hilchas Pesach, and you see the shilos in the past where people had literally 3 bowls and 2 knives and a fork, and the kosher shilos that people had for Pesach, and so on. People are far less furnished than we had, far less furnishings than we have. Yeah. Marvin Chosim, Marvin Taka. The Mishnah says, the more property we have, the more worries we have. But anyway, yeah.
I mean, I've only just haven't come much into this, but the last conclusion, the point of the Muhammad itself, is it just supporting the either way, whether it's the Soviet Nechemia, or whether it's Muhammad itself, what it's proving is that Rav is following Rav. You could follow him under either route.
Correct. That's Ibosim. 2 answers. Yes. Yeah.
Both points need equal as well.
Correct. Yes. 100%. Spot on. Yes. Yeah. I don't know if because I'm mistaken, and I apologize. This didn't tell everyone we were going to move on through the sukkah. I don't know how well people saw the sukkah later. If you haven't seen the sukkah, do that while I'm away, and then listen to the recording again, and hopefully it'll make sense. And I apologize. We will. But again, just to summarize the point, because the point is clear even without a detailed understanding of the Gemara. Rav told someone in his household to move a net so that Rav Kahana could sit. The Gemara initially understood this to be move a net so that Rav Kahana can sit on it, and asked why did Rav spell out that this was for the sake of Rav Kahana sitting on it? It must be that he only allows the movement of Muktza for Tzorech Gufay, because if he'd have allowed the Eden Tzorech Gufay, he could have just then moved the net. Gemara gives 2 answers. Either he meant move it out of the way so Rav Kahana can sit, in which case he was good for saying Tzorech Gufay, or it's because it was a case of Mechama L'Tzel. The net was in a place where it was getting damaged, and he wanted to move it. What does it mean he was getting damaged and he wanted to move it? Either people could have misunderstood that he was allowing Mechama L'Tzel, that's why he had to spell out why it was being moved so that Rav Kahana could sit, or his real intention was Mechama L'Tzel, and nonetheless it's allowed to do it.
But if he was saying his intention was not to move, that he moved it because he wanted, it wasn't Muhammad itself, and therefore it could be Lagufa, then you haven't got a proof it's Rafa. It could be Rafa.
You haven't got a proof, but you don't have a question. That's the point of the Gemara. The proof is from the earlier member of Rav. We now have a question on Rav. Why does Rav say LeTsorech Gufay? Surely even LeTsorech Gufay would have been enough. The answer is because he didn't want to be misunderstood. There was Mechama L'Tzel.
Is
Yeah.
He's got someone else to do the haram.
No. If it's much of one person, it's much of other people. It doesn't make a difference. As long as they're moving it so that Kahana can sit on it, even though the real intention is to protect it, that's enough. So if you see something being damaged on Shabbos, find a reason to use it, even though you wouldn't plan to anyway use it. Take out the coconut and crack it, and eat a bit of it, even though you weren't planning to have the coconut today anyway. Yeah. The next member of the Gemara, again, I'll just summarize in case people haven't had time to see it, is Rav Mori Bar Rachel had Masechet Shabbat. So Masechet Shabbat is Rashi says it was some form of felt cushion, and it was b'shamsha. It was sitting in the sun, and it was getting ruined. And he asked Rava whether he can move it or not. So Rava said, "Yeah, it's allowed." So he said, "But I have others." So he said, "Okay, in other words, I've got more than one cushion, so I don't need this cushion." So Rava said, "Fine, but maybe guests will come and they'll need the cushion." So he says, "I've got plenty. I've got enough for my guests." So Rava said to him, "I see that really you hold like Rabba, Rabba Svirulach, who holds that Mechama L'Tzel is also for Kli Shemlach Leheta, and therefore for you is also if you paskin that Kli Shemlach is that if you paskin that Kli Shemlach Leheta is also Mechama L'Tzel, then for you it's also." Okay, so just to summarize, Rav Kahana had felt cushions. These are Kli Shemlach Leheta. Rabba holds that they are also to move Mechama L'Tzel. We paskin like Rabba that they are mutter to move Mechama L'Tzel because they're Kli Shemlach Leheta. Kli Shemlach L'Issa you can't move. Kli Shemlach Leheta you can move. All I want to mention is that even though Rabba held that Kli Shemlach Leheta you can't move Mechama L'Tzel because of Nechemia, he agreed that kelim that are used to Todir the whole time can be moved Mechama L'Tzel. Now, I just want to give a bit of background to this again. On Omid earlier, we learned Nechemia. Nechemia has a much stricter version of Muktza, in which basically initially everything was Osa, other than very basic essentials, kalim that are used the whole time, kalim that are used toddy the whole time, like cutlery and plates. Anything else which isn't used the whole time, Nechemia held don't use on Shabbos, says the gezerah to avoid getting near melachos. This whole gezerah was unraveled to some degree. How big a degree? Rabba held that klisha melachot leheta, you still can't move mecham l'tel. We paskin. Rabba held that klisha melachot leheta, you still can't move mecham l'tel. We paskin. I'll come to in a moment. We paskin that klisha melachot leheta, you can move mecham l'tel. What remains for us of Nechemia? Not to move something for no reason at all. So even a non-Muktza item, the Mishnah Paskin shouldn't be moved for no reason at all. That's how, at least in the Lamodim, learned people paskin, as part of the language of Louise. That's how we paskin that a kli shouldn't be moved at all. However, a kli that's moved todir the whole time can be moved without any restrictions whatsoever. In our Gemara, you see that this cushion is not called a kli shemalachto lehata that's moved todir, and therefore Rava and Rav Mori Barachel held that you can't move it mechama l'tel. We paskin you can move a kli shemalachto lehata mechama l'tel, but we have from this Gemara a nafkamina that you wouldn't be allowed to move cushions for no reason whatsoever, because we paskin that even a kli shemalachto lehata can't be moved for no reason whatsoever. Is anyone clear on what I'm saying, or is this painfully confusing? Again, kli shemalachto lehata, we're used to thinking of not being muktza at all. Rava disagreed. Rava disagreed. Rava held you can't move a kli shemalachto lehata mechama. We don't paskin like that. We do, though, have one lingering element of this, which is to move it for no reason. At least according to Mishnah, you shouldn't move it for no reason at all. That's a kli shemalachto lehata. Something that's todir, a very basic need of people, like cutlery. There's no limitation at all. Is a cushion like cutlery? Is it something that's used todir or not? In our Gemara, you see that it's not like cutlery, and it's not a kli that's used constantly, and therefore you shouldn't move it for no reason at all. I avoided this question previously. There is a question around clothes, for example. Are clothes called something that's used todir, or by definition, or no? It depends on the clothing. So obviously, basic clothing is called something that's used todir. But if you have a smart outfit that you very rarely wear, maybe a lady has a gown that she would only wear at a simcha, and Shabbos morning she wakes up and she thinks, you know what, I'll wear my gown. She can wear it on Shabbos, no reason. It's an item of clothing. But this gown that's very rarely worn, can she move it for no reason whatsoever? The halacha, or is it not called a kli shemalachto lehata, and therefore, it's not called a kli that's todir, and therefore it'd be also to move it for no reason at all. So these are some of the nafkaminas that emerge. Sorry, Shimi.
Why does Rava feel the need to say maybe you use it for guests? The Rava, even if you don't move it for guests, if it's in the sun, then you can move it. So Rava should have replied, when he said I don't need it, Rava should have replied, doesn't matter, you can still move it.
Yeah.
Sorry, is he not assuming controlled by Rava? Yeah, he's like on Friday saying, okay, I'm not going to have a confrontation with you about this. I'm going to come up with a scenario that even you would say permitted.
Yeah. Rava doesn't say that to initially. Initially he says mutter. Then he says it's yachrina. So Rava now realizes he's in Rava's worldview. So he says also mutter. Then he says I've got enough at Orchim. So he says you're right. According to you, it'd be also. Yeah. Adam's point now, just to go into this, when we learned the previous onwards, it was implicit but not spelt out. Rabba's view. This Gemara is the Makara that they were showing referenced earlier. So your comment is absolutely correct. This is where we see what we assumed earlier, that Rabba holds you can't move mechama l'tel if you should after this. Yeah.
One thing you said.
Yes.
I thought Rabba holds that if it's similar to the heta, you can move mechama l'tel. Did you say this, that yes to a point, but the point when
Rava holds mechama l'tel you can move.
Yeah.
Rabba says you can't move. According to many poskim, amongst them the Mishnah Berurah, even Rava agrees that for no reason whatsoever you can't move. Mechama l'tel is a reason, but for no reason not. This seems to be the view of the Rambam. It's quite astounding because it's a halacha. The Avnei Nezer points out that no one knows this halacha. But the Rambam seems to be passing this way, and the Mishnah Berurah seems to hold this, that just willy-nilly to move, even a kli shemalachto lehata, you shouldn't use unless it's a kli that's todir. We saw that Avnei Nezer says the limits of Chutzanis, but the Chofetz Chaim himself held not like that. He held he shouldn't move for no reason. It's a whole another strata of Muktza that as Avnei Nezer says, almost everyone is blind to. Yeah.
I think we did mention clothing briefly when we were talking about Nechemia.
Yes.
If you say that choices that need to be a base kibble,
Yes.
so then possible that clothing was never in the Isser of Nechemia anyway.
But both ways around, because Tosa seems to take base kibble as a kula.
Right.
That if it has a base kibble that contains food, then it wouldn't include the Nechemia. Yeah. Okay. I just want to use the last few minutes available to us. I'll just see how much time we have. I'll just say a few more comments. The first one is so what all I've said so far is that even though Mori Bar Rachel is Shaloi Halacha, we can still draw halachas out of him. The first halacha we can draw out of him is that he held that these cushions have the issa mechama LeTsorech according to Rabbah, and therefore according to us have the issa of moving for no reason whatsoever. The second halacha you see is that isdi achrina seems to be a relevant halachic fact. And this brings us back again to the Mishnah Berurah I mentioned, which is the fact that you have other things a reason not to move muktzah in a mutter way or not. If I have a muktzah item that I want to use for that I want to use the LeTsorech, doesn't matter that I have other items and therefore I don't need to or not. And again, I just reference this Mishnah Berurah that's in Shin Chasif cutting your base that we've spoken about a few times.
You come up with a hammer. You've got knock.
Yeah.
You can't start using
110, yeah, absolutely. That would be the nafkamina, very important nafkamina. Is the heter klish melachot issa the heter a blanket heter? You can use it for heter, or only if you have no choice. Yeah. There are those, by the way, in answer to Jimmy, who was asking about the difference, who said even klish melachot issa heter should be mukta, but we allowed it. It was a weaker mukta, and therefore we sort of pushed away the issa. It's like more of a tzuya. But therefore, if you have a choice, you shouldn't move it for that. Okay. I just want to, just for the sake of thoroughness, say a few more points, and then we'll stop for today. The Gemara references a broom. The machbeda is a broom, and the Gemara says that a regular broom is mutter to use on Shabbos because it's not mukta. Why shouldn't it be mukta? But a broom made of palm branches is osa to use on Shabbos. It's mukta. Why is it osa to use on Shabbos? So Rashi says because it will, when you sweep, they used to have dusty floors, earthen floors, and when you sweep with a broom that has tougher bristles, it creates gumus, furrows in the floor. And these furrows are, actually when we first started learning Masechet Shabbat, we learned this when we were doing the melachos, these furrows are perhaps choresh or chofer, whatever the issue is. Therefore, you can't make these furrows. Now, what are these furrows? They are an incidental side effect, which I don't care about. I don't even want these furrows in the floor. So they're an incidental side effect. So the halacha we paskin that an incidental side effect that is not definitely going to happen and you don't want is allowed. However, Rashi learns this is a psik reisha v'lo yomus. Psik reisha v'lo yomus means can you chop off a head and something won't die? An inevitable consequence. Inevitable consequence, psik reisha is asa. And that's how Rashi learns the issa is. It's because of psik reisha of the davar she'einu miskavein, and therefore you're not allowed to do it. All I want to say is, just for the sake of thoroughness, there's three explanations given about what the issa here in the Gemara is of using this this thick bristled broom, this palm leaf broom, either as Rashi says because of psik reisha, or no, it's not a psik reisha, it won't definitely make furrows, but it's a davar she'einu miskavein, and there's an opinion that davar she'einu miskavein is awesome. There's an opinion that davar she'einu miskavein is even when it's not psik reisha. That's the second explanation. Third explanation, which brings us back to our topics, is because you're moving dust around. And many of the Rishonim say this. Dust is mukta. So how can you move dust around on Shabbos? That's the basis of the issa of moving this broom, because it's thick bristled. So it's not just moving the rubbish out of the way; it's also moving the dust out of the way, and therefore it's moving mukta on Shabbos. It's mukta though. You're moving mukta. You're deliberately moving the earthenware. It seems, by the way, the Metzias was. You have to picture medieval looks where there used to be scraps of food left on the floor and so on. And what they do is they just move the dirt over it often to clean it, and therefore I'm deliberately moving up. Yeah. Why wouldn't Rashi say this or other Rishonim say this? So one possible answer is as Adam said, and the Rishonim say this is because of Graf Shalrei. There's a unique halacha on Shabbos that if something is disgusting, which is classic mukta, it's got no use whatsoever, but if it's horrible and ruining your ability to enjoy the space, because it's smelly, or grashule was a potty or something like that. So that would be allowed to you'd be allowed to move it. So this I wasn't going to mention this, but since you mentioned it, it's a fair point. We've learned Hiltul min Hatzad, which is when you're moving things directly. This sugya becomes an important maramokum in whether moving things indirectly is only when you're not using an implement designed for moving things. Because the whole logic of moving things indirectly is a sort of kilachiyad, like a nior, or even without nior, just an indirect movement. But if you're using something which is deliberately designed to move things, like a fork or a broom, that wouldn't be called Hiltul min Hatzad. So again, I'm not going to go through that whole discussion, but when we do Chazorah from the beginning of the Perek, it was this Perek or in Daf Mem Beis when we were I think it was actually Daf Mem Beis that we learned Hiltul min Hatzad. Yeah. Okay. So when those were here to Chazorah, there is a halacha called Hiltul min Hatzad, moving things directly, correctly mentioned by Max. And there's a machlokus as to whether Hiltul min Hatzad means anytime you move something indirectly, even with a broom or a fork or a shovel, or only when it's an indirect movement where it's not. The whole point of indirect is you're not directly relating to the Muktza. But if you're using an implement designed as the means, the vehicle through which you connect to the Muktza, you can't say this is an indirect, I'm not engaging with the Muktza. The final point I want to make in this respect is, I'll make one more ha'ara and then I'll finish, which is a wonderful Chazon Ish and such a mind-blowing Kiddush that is just so illuminating. The Chazon Ish asks this question: why are there Rishonim who don't hold that there's a problem moving the dust? And the Chazon Ish answers by making a remarkable comparison. The Rishonim say that you're allowed to peel an orange on Shabbos. Let's forget melachos of bosh and so on, but surely I am engaging with Muktza item with a peel. And the answer is my physical action may be on the peel, but my engagement is with the fruit. The peel is toffel to the fruit. It's like an insignificant coating of the fruit. And I'm engaging with the fruit, and the Muktza is incidental, fundamentally incidental. My physical manual motions are on the peel, but my hisaskus, my involvement is moving the peel out of the way to get to the fruit. So Chazon Ish says a similar story over here. He says, I want the floor clean. I'm moving the dust out of the way. I'm not engaging with the dust. I'm engaging with the floor. Floor is not Muktza. Floor is useful for me. I want to live on the floor. I want to do things on the floor. And I'm moving the dust out of the way. It's like peeling a fruit. I'm just trying to get the dust out of the way to get access to a clean floor. A very beautiful thought from the Chazon Ish. Again, a lot of discussion around this Torah, whether it's a good Torah or not. But with that, we finished up to the Mishnah, the main points I wanted to say on the Mishnah. And Emir Hashem next. Maybe I'll take a little bit of feedback whether people want to use the week for Chazorah or are happy to or would like to start the next circuit, in which case I can send sources. But I do think it's worth thinking Chazorah, I must say. I'm reminding myself as I'm talking how rusty I've gone on this. So, yeah. Okay, so I'll let Adam maybe just collect feedback and then we'll make a decision based on that. Yeah. Okay.